What if everything you know about World War II is only half the story? Beneath the battles and leaders lies a darker layer, stories so disturbing they were buried, erased, or never meant to surface. Ghost soldiers, faked corpses, forbidden documents, and entire missions wiped from the record. These aren't legends, they're suppressed history. And once you hear them, you can't unhear them. Open this door carefully, because what's inside was never meant to be found. April 1945. Berlin was collapsing under the weight of its sins. The Soviet army was closing in from the east, their artillery a constant, unrelenting thunder in the distance. Buildings crumbled, streets burned, and in the chaos, few noticed the small group of figures moving beneath the city, through its ancient sewer tunnels and forgotten U-Bahn shafts. Major Elizabeth Hawthorne, Special Operations Executive, moved with precision. She'd infiltrated Berlin 2 weeks prior, parachuting under moonlight into the Grunewald forest and assuming the identity of a Swiss Red Cross nurse. The mission: extract Dr. Wilhelm Gruner, a Nazi physicist attempting to defect with knowledge of a prototype missile, an intercontinental weapon designed to reach the eastern seaboard of the United States. Dr. Gruner's motivations weren't altruistic. He knew the war was lost, and feared retribution from both the SS and the Soviets. What he possessed, however, could not fall into enemy hands. Hawthorne's handlers in London deemed the intelligence potentially war-defining. Her cover was paper-thin. She relied on quick reflexes, fluent German, and the uniform she'd stolen off a real nurse now buried in the ruins of a bombed-out hospital. Hawthorne's contact in Berlin, a wiry Polish resistance fighter named Marek Kowal, led her to Gruner's hiding place, a disused wine cellar below a crumbling bookstore near Friedrichstrasse. The physicist was not what she expected. Thin, nervous, perpetually wringing his hands, Gruner trembled when he spoke. "They are everywhere," he whispered, flinching at every sound. "The SS. They are killing anyone they suspect of betrayal. I should have left months ago." "Then we move now," Hawthorne said. She handed him a bag of rations, civilian clothes, and a forged ID. "We have one shot to reach the tunnel beneath the Reich Chancellery. The Soviets won't wait for us." They moved by night, navigating rubble, avoiding patrols, and sleeping in what was left of churches, basements, and supply depots. Berlin was a city of ghosts. SS patrols had orders to shoot deserters and spies on sight. Along the way, they passed scenes that would burn into memory. A group of Hitler youth armed with Panzerfausts, manning a checkpoint with wide eyes and trembling hands, the charred remains of a Jewish family hidden in an attic too long, a mother sobbing over a son crushed by falling debris. By the third night, they reached the sewer junction beneath Wilhelmstrasse. Hawthorne used a hidden key embedded in her boot heel to unlock the rusted grate. Inside was a cache left by a previous SOE mission: maps, rations, and a concealed radio transmitter. They needed to broadcast their coordinates and wait for extraction. "I thought we were leaving," Gruner said, his voice cracking. "Why are we stopping? We don't leave unless they know where to find us." Hawthorne powered the transmitter, twisted the frequency dial, and began to send her coded message in Morse, black lantern intact. "Awaiting extraction at junction Theta 9. 47 hours window. Acknowledge." No reply. Static buzzed for hours. Gruner grew restless, pacing. "They won't come. They've forgotten us." "They'll come," Hawthorne said, though doubt gnawed at her. The Allies had bigger concerns. Would one scientist matter now, in the war's final throes? On the fourth day, the reply came: 3 dots, pause, 2 dashes, code received. The message was clear: extraction in 24 hours. A tunnel through the Soviet-occupied East would be cleared temporarily by resistance fighters to allow passage to a disguised medical truck on the outskirts. But trouble found them first. As dawn broke, footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Hawthorne froze. SS patrol, 3 men, dogs, flashlights. Gruner panicked and bolted into the dark. "No!" Hawthorne hissed, but it was too late. Gunfire erupted. She followed the noise, drawing her silenced pistol. One SS man lay dead, his neck snapped. Koval's work, she thought. Another turned his weapon toward her. She dropped him with a clean shot to the chest. The third fled. Gruner lay wounded, shot through the leg, whimpering, "Don't leave me." They had less than 12 hours now. With help from Koval, who emerged bloodied but alive, they carried Gruner through the labyrinth of tunnels. The physicist groaned in pain, drifting in and out of consciousness, muttering coordinates, formulae, and pleas for morphine. When they finally reached the eastern breach, Soviet shelling illuminated the horizon in red. A resistance convoy, disguised as a Red Cross unit, waited with forged documents and a stolen ambulance. Hawthorne and Koval loaded Gruner inside, moments before artillery struck barely 2 blocks away. The drive to the border was a gauntlet of death. Soviet tanks roared through intersections, buildings collapsed under bombing, and looters prowled the streets. At one checkpoint, a Red Army lieutenant eyed their papers suspiciously, but let them pass after Koval offered him a bottle of schnapps and muttered something in Russian. They crossed into neutral territory just after dusk. 3 days later, in a safe house in Zurich, Hawthorne handed over Gruner to British handlers. She remained quiet as they questioned him, as they dissected his sketches, his calculations, his secrets. She didn't care what the missile was capable of. She only cared that he wasn't in Berlin anymore. On VE Day, as Europe celebrated victory, Elizabeth Hawthorne sat alone in a hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, a glass of brandy in her hand. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply listened to the silence, a silence she had not known in 6 long years. The northern lights shimmered above the desolate fjords of Nordhavn, Norway, casting ghostly colors across the frozen sea. It was February 1942, and deep beneath the shimmering ice, the German submarine U-426 lay crippled on the seabed, hidden from Allied sonar but unable to surface. The mission had started with clear orders: intercept and destroy an Allied convoy carrying supplies to Murmansk. Captain Dietrich Raus, decorated and fiercely loyal to the Kriegsmarine, had executed a perfect ambush near Bear Island, sinking 2 freighters and damaging a third. But the celebration was short-lived. A British destroyer retaliated with depth charges, the final one exploding near the stern of U-426 and crippling the engine. Now, the submarine sat in a shallow trench, tilted at an angle, 30 meters beneath the surface, half frozen and dying. Raus kept his men busy. Engineer Otto Vesper tried in vain to repair the damaged diesel engines while Navigator Fisher mapped out the least treacherous path back to the surface. But the hull was cracked. Batteries were low. Oxygen was dwindling. And above them, silence. No Allied ships. No rescue. No signal. By the 3rd day, frost formed inside the cabin walls. The heat was gone, and so was the morale. The crew rationed their remaining food: hardtack, canned sausage, and brown water. They wrapped themselves in wool and shared body heat. But the cold crept in anyway, slow and inevitable. Raus refused to abandon the mission. "We are soldiers of the Reich," he told his men. "We do not surrender. We endure." But not all shared his resolve. Radio operator Emil Hartmann, only 19, began writing a diary in the margins of a forgotten logbook. His entries became the story of U-426. Day 5. The captain still won't surface. He believes the British are waiting. I think he's wrong. I think we are already ghosts. One man, Seaman Klaus Henning, tried to open the outer hatch during the night. He was stopped by 2 crewmates before he could flood the boat. "They're not coming," he sobbed. "Nobody's coming." The cold did strange things. Crew members reported whispers in the dark, voices echoing from the vents, footsteps that weren't there. Fisher claimed he heard the sonar pinging from Allied ships, but the radio remained silent. Day 7. We heard singing. Old sea shanties, from above the ice. No one is there. Maybe it's in our heads. Maybe the ice sings to those it intends to keep. On the 9th day, Raus ordered a full shutdown of non-essential systems to preserve power. The lights dimmed. The oxygen scrubbers slowed. Breath fog lingered in the air like smoke. One by one, the men began to lose their grip. Otto Vesper, once the most rational of them all, began carving equations into the metal walls with a knife. "If the hull holds, we can launch the escape suits," he muttered, over and over. "It's just numbers. Pressure. Time." But the suits were meant for emergencies, not an Arctic tomb. Only 3 remained functional. Rouse refused to let any of them be used. Hartmann continued to write. Day 10. The captain won't speak now. He stares at the ceiling. I think he hears them too. The voices from the ice. On the 11th night, with temperatures plummeting and morale gone, for men mutinied. They stormed the captain's quarters with makeshift weapons, demanding release. Rouse emerged with his pistol and shot 2. The others surrendered. Hartmann's entry that night was a single line. Day 11. There is no honor left in this steel coffin. By day 13, the batteries failed completely. Darkness took the sub. The only light came from the narrow periscope shaft, reflecting faint moonlight through ice-streaked water. Then, miraculously, movement. A rumble overhead. The faint screech of ice breaking. An Allied icebreaker, HMS Resolute, part of a routine patrol. A signal flare, kept in emergency storage, was launched through the sub's compressed air chute. It reached the surface. They were spotted. Divers arrived hours later. Of the original 47 crew, only 9 remained alive. They were hauled out in body bags, too cold to move, hallucinating, half-mad. Hartmann clutched the logbook to his chest. Rouse refused to speak. The Allied officers were stunned by what they found. No resistance. No fight. Just silence. And in the silent hull of U-426, frost-covered messages scrawled on bulkheads, carved with knives, etched in fingernails. The voices from the ice had been recorded. Hartmann was interrogated, but provided little information beyond his journal. The last entry read, Day 13. I hope someone reads this. Not for our glory, but to remember that even those who fought for the wrong side felt fear, sorrow, and cold. We all bleed the same in the dark. U-426 was towed back to Scapa Flow for study, then quietly scuttled by the Royal Navy. Hartmann, after the war, disappeared from public records. Some believe he returned to Germany under a new name. Others say he never left Norway. But in Nordhavn, locals tell stories. Fishermen claim you can still hear voices under the ice on cold nights. Murmurs of steel, frost, and men who never left the sea. Paris, 1943. The streets hummed with the sound of war, low conversations in back alleys, the stomp of German boots along cobblestones, the distant rumble of trucks carrying prisoners to unknown ends. Under occupation, the City of Light had grown quiet, watchful, afraid. But in the grand halls of Hotel Majestic, where Nazi officers dined and mingled, a different kind of sound filled the air. Violins, cellos, and pianos. The orchestra played every night. They called themselves the Orchestre du Crépuscule, the Twilight Orchestra. Officially, they were a collection of musicians performing for the Nazi elite, hand-picked from the finest conservatories. In truth, they were a carefully constructed illusion, a resistance cell built under the guise of elegance. At the heart of it was Eva Lichten, a Hungarian violinist of Jewish descent whose papers identified her as Austrian and pure. She played with precision, but her eyes never smiled. Eva had fled Budapest after her family disappeared in the night. Music became her shield. Resistance became her revenge. Each member of the orchestra had a story. Armand Lefebvre, the pianist, had once composed for silent films and now composed code, messages hidden within sheet music. His fugues carried the names of collaborators. His waltzes mapped troop positions. Cellist Marcel Dumas was a courier. He'd slide microfilm into the hollowed scroll of his instrument and pass it to contacts between encores. Their conductor, Maestro Friedrich Stein, was a German expatriate who'd turned against the Reich after witnessing the burning of his synagogue in Berlin. He was the only one who could speak directly to the SS officers with convincing warmth, hiding his hatred beneath every bow. Every performance was a risk. They played Beethoven, Mozart, Schubert, music the Nazis revered, never suspecting their cultural treasure was laced with betrayal. The orchestra encoded resistance messages using a system Stein had devised. A wrong note in the second movement meant, transport train spotted. A hesitation in the third measure signaled a bombing delay. These signals were picked up by sympathetic staff and funneled to the French resistance through wine merchants and laundresses. On the surface, they were praised by the Nazis. General Klaus Meissner once called Eva the violin of the fatherland, never knowing the woman he applauded had once played lullabies for Jewish children his soldiers had shot. But danger lurked at every turn. The Gestapo had begun to suspect leaks from within the hotel. Interrogations increased. Staff vanished. And one night, a new officer arrived, Hauptsturmführer Otto Kramer. He was sharp, clean, young. Too observant. Kramer watched the orchestra with the cold detachment of a man who had seen too much. After several nights, he approached Maestro Stein. "The violinist," he said. "Her technique is flawless. But there is something insincere in her eyes." Stein forced a chuckle. "Artists, Herr Hauptsturmführer. They live in another world." Kramer smiled thinly. "Indeed. But I live in this one. And in this one, lies are punishable." That night, the orchestra played Tchaikovsky. Eva's bow trembled for the first time. Her coded message, "Arrest imminent," was received by Armand. Plans had to change. They decided to disband the orchestra under the guise of a special tour to Vichy. In truth, it was a planned extraction. The resistance would intercept the train, reroute it through a forest corridor, and smuggle the musicians to Spain. But Kramer was already moving. The night before departure, he summoned Eva for a private audition. In a dim parlor, she stood before him, violin in hand. "Play," he said, sitting in a leather armchair. "Something personal." She chose Bach's Chaconne in D minor. A funeral for her past. Each note a confession. Her hands moved flawlessly, but her heart beat with terror. Kramer watched in silence. When she finished, he clapped once. Slowly. "You're not who you say you are," he said softly. "I don't know what you are. Spy. Jew. Rebel. But I see you." Eva didn't respond. She held her violin tighter. "I could have you shot," Kramer added. "Right now." "Then do it," she said. He stood, stepped closer, and whispered, "No. I want to see how your story ends." He let her leave. The next morning, the orchestra boarded the train. But halfway to Vichy, German troops stopped them. Kramer had changed his mind. A gunfight erupted in the woods. Marcel was shot protecting the microfilm. Armand escaped into the trees with Eva, both wounded. Stein stayed behind, walking calmly toward Kramer with his baton in hand. He was executed on the spot. Eva and Armand reached a farmhouse, where a resistance medic tended to their injuries. They were separated shortly after. Armand was smuggled to Portugal. Eva chose to stay. She couldn't leave France, not yet. She spent the rest of the war working with underground cells in Lyon, forging documents, hiding children, and never playing music again. After the liberation, the Hotel Majestic was reclaimed. In the rubble of the bombed dining hall, someone found a scorched violin case with a message carved into the lid. "We played for them. But we never played with them." Eva Lichten's name appeared on no official resistance rolls. Her violin was never found. But in the Paris Conservatory, there is a memorial to the lost musicians of the war. Among the names is E. Lichten. No photo. No date of death. Only silence and the echo of a violin that once played truth beneath the lies. The snow fell soft over the wreckage of Nanking, like ash that refused to stop. By early 1938, the once bustling capital had become a haunted grave. Homes lay gutted. Markets stood empty. Streets echoed with nothing but wind. And hidden within a collapsed temple outside the city center was a man who refused to die. His name was Chen Diyun, a former professor of literature at the University of Nanking. Before the war, he'd taught poetry, Tang Dynasty verse, Confucian classics, Western Romanticism. He lived a quiet life with his wife Lin and their 2 daughters. But when the Japanese army stormed the city in December 1937, that life ended. They came in waves, tanks, soldiers, fire. Lin and the girls were taken from their home before Chen's eyes. He never saw them again. He should have died. Shot in the head and left for dead in a pile of bodies. But the bullet grazed him, and he clawed his way from the dead and into the ruins. From that moment, he ceased to be a teacher. He became a ghost, a man fueled by rage, heartbreak, and an obsessive purpose, to record everything. He scoured the city, day and night, hiding in sewers and behind shattered walls. With a scavenged notebook and pens soaked in ink and blood, Chen documented the atrocities. He wrote down names, when he could find them, of the murdered. He recorded details, age, wounds, what they were doing when they died. He wrote what the newspapers never would. What no one would believe unless someone survived to say it. He wrote about the nun burned alive in her orphanage chapel, the little boy on the riverbank, holding his sister's hand, neither moving, the teenage girl who jumped into the Yangtze to escape the soldiers, and the ones who laughed as she drowned. Each night, he buried a copy of his pages in tin canisters beneath the roots of cherry trees or deep inside temple walls. He called it the Book of Ghosts. But Chen didn't just record. Over time, the survivors found him. Word spread of the man who knows, and people came in secret, women with swollen faces, men with missing fingers, children who hadn't spoken in weeks. Chen began hiding them. In a shattered Buddhist temple near Taiping Road, he built a network of crawlspaces and tunnels, reinforced with stolen bricks and timber. He used broken doors as barriers, furniture as camouflage. At one point, he was sheltering over 70 people, farmers, monks, school teachers, babies. He rationed rice stolen from abandoned warehouses. He used boiled rags as bandages. He taught the children how to stay silent when Japanese patrols came near. And every day he wrote. One morning, a wounded Japanese deserter stumbled into the temple ruins, barefoot, frostbitten, delirious. He'd been part of the initial invasion, he claimed. He'd defected after witnessing a massacre. The man, Satoshi Genda, begged for shelter. Chen nearly killed him. But the others stopped him. And the man wept. Satoshi became part of them. He helped repair walls. He learned Mandarin. He swore he'd do anything to repay the debt of what his country had done. Chen didn't trust him fully. Not ever. But he let him stay. In March 1938, betrayal came. A boy from the group, desperate for food, had left the temple and been captured. Under torture, he gave up the location. 2 days later, Japanese soldiers stormed the site. They set fire to the ruins. Chen and Satoshi led the escape through an old drainage system. But many were trapped. Dozens burned or were shot trying to flee. Chen was shot again, this time in the shoulder, but kept moving. Satoshi carried him for nearly a mile through the city's underbelly until they reached an abandoned clinic. They waited 3 days for the patrols to fade. Only 15 survivors remained. Chen wept, not for his pain, but for the pages he'd lost in the fire. Satoshi, guilt-ridden, offered himself in penance. "Kill me, and maybe your ghosts will sleep," he said. Chen didn't kill him. Instead, he handed him a notebook, one of the few that had survived. "Take it," Chen said. "Leave Nanking. Take it to Shanghai, to the missionaries. Let the world see." Satoshi vanished that night. Some said he died trying to cross enemy lines. Others believe he made it. All that is certain is that, weeks later, a package arrived at the Shanghai International Settlement, wrapped in linen and blood-stained at the corners. Inside were pages of horror, sketches, testimony, names. The Book of Ghosts had escaped. Chen remained in Nanking. He continued his work for another 2 years until disease took him. A mass grave near the temple bears his name, carved crudely into stone. After the war, fragments of Chen's journals were translated and archived by international tribunals. Some pages remain in the Nanking Massacre Memorial Hall today. Others are missing, buried perhaps still beneath cherry trees or temple floors. And every year, when the first snow falls in Nanjing, the locals say you can hear pages turning in the wind, quiet, steady, relentless. The Book of Ghosts is not done being written. The rain lashed down over the cliffs of Dover in the early hours of June 4, 1944. Beneath the roar of waves and wind, a secret briefing was underway in a small concrete bunker carved into the coastline. 5 men stood around a table, faces lit by a single bulb, their eyes fixed on a map of Normandy's beaches. They were Unit 9906, a covert cell within the British Special Operations Executive. Officially, they did not exist. Unofficially, they were the architects of deception. Their mission was simple, in theory. Convince the German High Command that the D-Day invasion would land in Calais, not Normandy. But this wasn't just camouflage nets and inflatable tanks. This was Operation Lazarus, a psychological operation so audacious that it was classified higher than even the Manhattan Project. At its center was a dead man named Captain Elias Monroe. Elias had died 6 months earlier in Sicily, ambushed while scouting ahead of Allied lines. A decorated British officer fluent in German and French, his body had been recovered, buried, and mourned. But he hadn't stayed buried for long. 2 weeks later, his corpse was exhumed in secret. His identity scrubbed. His face altered with post-mortem reconstruction. His uniform changed to that of a high-ranking Nazi defector. The plan: drop Monroe's body, planted with fake documents, maps, and letters, into German-occupied France, staged to look like a failed exfiltration gone wrong. The goal was to make the Germans believe he'd been a real defector carrying vital intel about an upcoming Allied assault on Calais. It was a bluff that needed to be perfect. Forger Ivy Keene, a quiet woman with a talent for mimicry, created Monroe's new identity, Oberstleutnant Wilhelm Kruger, a disgraced Nazi officer who had supposedly turned against the Reich after the execution of his Jewish wife. She filled his briefcase with falsified letters from British generals, detailed plans for a false invasion at Normandy, making it look like Calais was the real target, and a forged letter from Churchill himself. It was Ivy who added the final touch, a torn photo of a woman and child, with the words, "For immer in meinem Herzen," "Forever in my heart," scribbled on the back. Emotional authenticity. A real spy always carried ghosts. The corpse was dressed, chilled, and flown over France in the dead of night. He was dropped from a low-flying plane over the banks of the Seine, tangled in a failed parachute. Within hours, German troops found the body. The false identity, the documents, the confession, all of it was delivered to Abwehr intelligence. By June 5, German forces in Calais doubled their strength. But Operation Lazarus wasn't over. Unit 9906 had a backup team already operating inside France. The Choir, for French resistance fighters with forged Nazi credentials. Their job was to pose as Gestapo agents investigating Kruger's betrayal, pushing rumors, interrogating locals, creating a storm of suspicion. Every pub conversation, every overheard train whisper, was carefully staged to amplify the lie. Then, 2 days before the actual invasion, the Choir vanished. Their last message, transmitted by Morse from a hidden radio inside a farmhouse, was only 4 words. They found the Lazarus. Panic spread inside 9906. Had the Germans uncovered the ruse? Would they shift their forces back to Normandy? If the deception collapsed now, thousands of Allied troops would die on the beaches. But something strange happened. The Germans didn't pull back. In fact, Hitler delayed deploying the 15th Army from Calais for 7 critical days, the exact window the Allies needed. Only later would British intelligence learn why. One of Hitler's inner circle, Martin Bormann, had read the fake letters. And he believed them, because they spoke in Hitler's language. The paranoia, the betrayal, the grandiosity. It was too perfect. Kruger, this ghost made of lies, had whispered the exact story Hitler wanted to hear. The invasion of Normandy began on June 6. Operation Overlord succeeded. The war began to turn. But the story of Unit 9906 did not end in victory. 2 months later, as Allied forces advanced through France, a mass grave was discovered near Rouen. 4 bodies, all shot. Among them were members of the choir, and a 5th, unidentifiable, burned beyond recognition. The file on Operation Lazarus was sealed. Its contents buried in government vaults. Ivy Keene, after the war, disappeared. Some say she moved to Argentina under a new name. Others believe she was silenced. But rumors continued. In 1961, an elderly German émigré in Brazil claimed to have known Wilhelm Kruger personally. He said Kruger was real, that he had defected, that he had died for a truth he never knew was a lie. He was dismissed as a fantasist. Yet in 1998, a flood in an old MI6 storage facility unearthed a single tin briefcase, waterlogged and rusting. Inside was a faded photo, a soldier in a British uniform, standing beside a woman and child. On the back, in smudged ink, asterisk, for immer in meinem Herzen. Asterisk. The story of Operation Lazarus remains unconfirmed. But somewhere beneath the fields of France, in an unmarked grave, lies a man who never lived and yet changed the course of history. You've just heard the stories they tried to erase, lives traded for lies, truth buried beneath propaganda, and horrors too complex for textbooks. These weren't just shadows of war, they were its conscience, hidden in plain sight. If you're wondering how much more was kept from the world, you're not alone. Because some secrets didn't die with the war. They were buried, waiting. And now, you've brought them back.